In this video, we're going to talk about angles and their measures in degrees. We're going to kind of expand on some basic concepts of geometry. And again, starting to kind of evolve this into something called the unit circle, in which we're going to start to look at trigonometry from a different perspective, all right? So our objective today is I want to be able to graph, identify, and find something that is called the reference angle of any angle that is in a degree mode, all right? Now, we are used to the angles being in a triangle or a quadrilateral or something like that, where those angle measurements are going to be between 0 and 180 degrees. But if we look at an angle on the coordinate plane, there's a couple of things that jump out. First thing and most important, whenever we are talking about an angle, its initial side, or the side in which the angle starts, is always going to be the positive x-axis. That is always going to be where we start measuring an angle from. Now, if the angle is positive, from that initial side, we move up and start kind of working ourselves in a counterclockwise manner. If the angle is negative, we still start at that same initial side, but now we're going to go down and start working our way in a clockwise motion. So again, positive, move counterclockwise from the initial side. Negative, move clockwise from the initial side. And where the angle ends, we're going to call that our terminal side. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Here's another picture right here that I kind of brought up just to kind of give you the idea. Here's our initial side in this first one. If we move up, we're going 120 degrees. And if we go from the initial side downward, we would travel negative 180 degrees. Now, the way that we represent these is going to be really important. So make sure that you're paying attention to the detail of how I do things like sketching these in standard position. Okay? So, first of all, they want me to graph negative 340 degrees. I know that my initial side is going to have to be the positive x-axis. So again, notice I'm graphing as an initial side the positive x-axis. Because this angle is negative, I know from that initial side, I'm going to move downward and clockwise. Now, if I were to travel from here to here, that would be negative 90 degrees. If I go to here, that's negative 180. If I go to here, that's negative 270. And if I make it all the way back to where I started, that would be negative 360. We're going to end up a little bit short. And what that short part right there represents is where our terminal side would be. Okay? So let me sketch this all again, just so you guys can see the whole process here without me slowing down. Start with the initial side. I know I'm going to travel almost one revolution all the way around. All right? I'm going to put an arrow on the end of this to represent the direction I was going, and then draw the terminal side. And all of these symbols, sorry, that arrow's not really turning out too great, okay, but you kind of get the idea. From the initial side, what direction I traveled to get to negative 340 degrees. All that we're going to do is approximate. So we should be pretty good. We should at least have our terminal side in the correct quadrant. Okay, so how about this next one, 585? We have an initial side here at x, positive x. I know positive angle means we're going to move upward and counterclockwise. So if I go all the way around one time, I'm at 360. All right, so I'm going to take that one complete revolution off of the 585 and see how much I'm left with. Well, I'm left with 225. So I know I've still got to go further. If I travel another 180 degrees, I'm not quite there yet. I've still got a little bit left to represent. So I know that my terminal side is going to be right about there. Now, I sketched the terminal side here. And all this kind of, let's call it a loop-de-loop. All this loop-de-loop that I did in there is representing how I would have to graph this 585. In other words, I can't just draw that and say it's 585. I have to show that I did more than one trip around the circle to get to 585 degrees. Okay? So what if they give us a picture though? And if you look on the picture, you can kind of see, all right, what I'm talking about, those multiple loops and stuff. All right? So here's what I know. I find where it starts, the initial side, and I noticed it goes down. Everybody notice that. So I know that I am dealing with a negative answer. This angle is going to be negative degrees. I go one time around. So I know that that's going to be, I traveled negative 360 degrees. I travel a second time all the way around. So there's a negative 360 again. And then on this last trip, I'm going to travel all the way to right there. And they say that it is 70 degrees away from the y-axis. Well, let's kind of retrace our steps. I went negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, and then 70 more, which would be negative 340 degrees. If I put all of these together, 360 plus 360 plus 340, that tells me that I traveled a total of negative 1,060 degrees. That is the actual degree measurement of that angle. Okay? In the second example here, we're moving in a positive direction, so I know my answer is going to be positive. All right, if I travel one loop around, I'm right there. So that would be 360. I get back on, I travel around another full circle. So that would be plus another 360. And then I go 90, 180, and a little bit more that ends up being 55 short of the y-axis. Well, I know that that means that this would be 25. All right, is that right? No, 35 degrees, sorry. I know that I would be traveling 35 degrees there because I know from the left x-axis to the negative x-axis to the negative y-axis is 90 degrees. So let me come back here. I've got my two loops. On my third loop, I go 90, 180, and 35. 180 and 35 will be 215. If I add those together, I have 360 plus 215. 360 plus 360 plus 215, or I have a 935 degree angle. All right. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about in this lesson is what is called a reference angle. And reference angles are going to be huge importance to us once we get into doing trigonometry on the unit circle. All right? Our reference angle is, by definition, the positive acute angle formed by the x-axis and the terminal side of a given angle. Notice I have to use the x-axis. It can be the positive x-axis or it can be the negative x-axis. Doesn't matter. It's the positive acute angle that has to be formed by the x-axis and the terminal side. All reference angles, therefore, must be between 0 and 90 degrees. I know that because it says they have to be acute. All right? Now, what I provided here was a quick way for how you can find this. If the angle's in quadrant 1, then the reference angle would be whatever that angle is. If it's in quadrant 2, you would take 180 minus the angle that they give you. Quadrant 3, you would take the angle they give you minus 180. In other words, you're trying to get it back or reference it to the x-axis. All right. And if it's in quadrant 4, we're going to take 360 minus whatever the angle given is. So let's take a look at this first example. All right. Here's what I know to be true. I need to find a reference angle for this piece right here. Okay. Now, because this is in the 4th quadrant, I'm going to take 360, which is on that positive x-axis, and take off of that 285. Now, if I take 360 minus 285, what I notice is that gives me 75 degrees. That's perfect because I know that this angle is 75 degrees below the x-axis. This angle is between 0 and 90. Therefore, the reference angle for a 285 degree angle would be a 75 degree angle. It's just a 75 degree angle in the 4th quadrant. Okay. How about this one? If we go negative 130 degrees. Well, if I look at this, I notice that this falls below the negative x-axis, or this falls, this falls in the 3rd quadrant. Okay, not a problem. In the 3rd quadrant, they tell us to take the angle that is given, negative 130, and subtract from it, look at the formula up there, subtract from it 180. Wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. This gives me negative 310 degrees. All right? They say that the reference angle somehow has to be in a measurement between 0 and 180 degrees. So this doesn't make sense. All right? You have to be able to kind of reverse your thinking here. Because we are dealing with a negative angle, all right, I'm going to say this isn't actual, but it gives you an idea. All right? This angle, because I traveled through one quadrant to a 2nd quadrant, I need to think of this angle as though it were one way to do this is to think of it as though it was in the 2nd quadrant. So for that, we would take 180, but then we're going to subtract negative 130. Again, it gives us 310 degrees. That's not between 0 and 90 degrees. So here's where you got to think outside the box a little bit. I know to get all the way up here from the initial side to the negative x-axis would be negative 180 degrees. All right? If that's negative 180 degrees, all right, I know that this angle right here falls 50 degrees short of getting to the negative x-axis. There it is. That is my reference angle now. All right? It's an angle whose measure is between 0 and 90 degrees. And guys, if you aren't sure on this, there's a couple of things that you could do also. I would encourage you to take a look at finding reference angles and simply doing a Google search. Let me know if you have any questions. I can always set up a Google chat and try to walk you through this. With a positive angle, it's usually pretty easy doing the reference angles. Negatives can kind of be a little bit confusing at times, and I get that. Good luck. Let me know if you need any help.